So there are places on this planet that just make you stop and wonder what the hell happened here. Not in a casual way, but in that deep, unsettling way where you realize that maybe we don't actually know as much about our own history as we like to think we do. Because scattered across the world, buried under jungles and deserts and oceans, there are these structures. Massive structures. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, carved with impossible precision, arranged in patterns that suggest knowledge we're not supposed to have had back then. And the thing is, nobody can really explain them. Not fully. Sure, archaeologists have theories, lots of theories actually, but when you look at what these ancient people supposedly accomplished with copper tools and wooden rollers, the math just doesn't add up. The engineering doesn't make sense. The timeline gets weird. And that's where things get interesting, because these aren't just old buildings. These are mysteries that challenge everything we've been taught about human civilization, about how it developed, about when it developed, and maybe even about whether we were the only ones doing the developing. Today we're going to look at some of the strangest prehistoric structures ever found, the ones that make experts scratch their heads and whisper about lost civilizations and forgotten technologies. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Seriously, try it. Let's start with something that shouldn't exist. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This place was discovered in the 1990s, and when archaeologists started digging, they basically had to rewrite the textbooks. Because according to everything we thought we knew about human history, hunter-gatherers weren't supposed to be capable of this kind of construction. They were supposed to be scattered, nomadic, focused on survival. Not building massive stone temples with intricate carvings. But that's exactly what they found. Göbekli Tepe is over 11,000 years old, which means it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. Let that sink in for a second. This site was already ancient when the pyramids were being built. The whole place consists of these massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons, arranged in circles. And they're not just standing there, they're covered in detailed carvings of animals. Lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, snakes. The craftsmanship is incredible, which raises an obvious question. How did people who supposedly hadn't even invented agriculture yet manage to quarry, transport, carve, and erect these enormous stones? And more importantly, why? What was the purpose? Most archaeologists think it was some kind of religious site, maybe the world's first temple. But here's where it gets really strange. Around 8,000 BC, somebody deliberately buried the entire complex. Not destroyed it, buried it. Carefully filled in with dirt, like they wanted to preserve it or hide it. Why would you spend generations building something this massive and sophisticated and then just bury it? Nobody knows. Some researchers think it might have been sealed away to protect sacred knowledge. Others think maybe the people who built it faced some kind of catastrophe and wanted to preserve their work for future generations. Or maybe they just changed their minds about the whole thing. The point is, we have no idea, and Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. There are similar sites being discovered all across that region. suggesting this wasn't just one weird anomaly but part of a much larger prehistoric culture we barely understand. Then there's Pumapunku in Bolivia, and this one really messes with your head. Pumapunku is part of a larger complex near Tiwanaku, and it's estimated to be around 1,500 years old, though some researchers argue it could be much older. What makes it special are the stone blocks. These aren't your typical rough-cut ancient stones. These are precision-engineered blocks with perfectly flat surfaces, exact right angles, and complex interlocking joints that look like they were machined. Some of the blocks weigh over 100 tons, and they're made from andesite and diorite, which are extremely hard stones. Carving them with copper or bronze tools, which is what the Tiwanaku people supposedly had, should have been nearly impossible. But somehow they did it, and they did it with a level of precision that's hard to replicate even with modern equipment. The surfaces are so flat that when you place them together, you can barely fit a piece of paper between them. No mortar needed, the stones just lock together perfectly. Some of the blocks have these weird H-shaped cuts and intricate grooves that serve no obvious structural purpose. They're just there, carved with perfect symmetry. Mainstream archaeology says the Tiwanaku people used harder stones to pound and grind these blocks into shape, which, okay, maybe. But when you look at the scale and precision involved, it seems like it would take forever. Decades, maybe centuries of constant work. And for what? Why go to all that trouble? Some alternative researchers think Pumapunku might be evidence of a much older, more advanced civilization. One that existed before the Tiwanaku and possessed technology we don't fully understand. Others point to the site's astronomical alignments and suggest it was some kind of ancient observatory or ceremonial center connected to celestial events. The Spanish conquistadors who arrived in the 1500s found the place already in ruins, and the local people had legends about it being built by giants in a single night. Obviously, that's mythology, but it shows that even the people living nearby didn't really know who built it or how. Today, Pumapunku is scattered with these massive blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, just lying around like pieces of a giant puzzle that nobody can put back together. And that's kind of the problem. The site has been damaged over the centuries, looted for building materials, messed with by early archaeologists who didn't have modern techniques. So we're left with fragments of something that was clearly extraordinary, but we can't fully reconstruct what it was or what it meant. Moving to Egypt now, because obviously we have to talk about Egypt. But not the pyramids. Everybody talks about the pyramids. Let's talk about the Osirian at Abydos instead. This is one of those structures that makes you question the official timeline of Egyptian history. The Osirian was discovered in 1902 by archaeologists excavating the temple of Seti I. And at first they thought it was part of that temple, which would date it to around 1300 BC. But when they dug deeper, literally, they found something where Osirian is built in a completely different style from everything around it. The stones are massive, some weighing over 100 tons, and they're fitted together without mortar using the same kind of precision joinery you see in much older megalithic sites. The whole structure sits way below ground level. and the stones show signs of severe water erosion, which is strange because Abydos is in the middle of the desert. Some researchers, most notably Robert Schoch, have argued that the erosion pattern suggests the Osirian was exposed to water for an extended period, which would mean it's much older than the New Kingdom, maybe even predating dynastic Egypt entirely. The mainstream view is that it was built by Seti I as a symbolic tomb for Osiris, the god of the afterlife. But here's the thing. The architectural style doesn't match anything from that period. It's simpler, more primitive in some ways, but also more impressive in terms of sheer engineering. The blocks are enormous and perfectly fitted, similar to what you see at sites like the Valley Temple next to the Sphinx. And speaking of the Sphinx, there's a similar debate about water erosion there too. Some geologists think the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure indicate it was carved much earlier than the traditional date of 2500 BC, possibly during a time when the Egyptian climate was much wetter. If that's true, then we're talking about a completely different civilization, one that existed before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, before recorded history. And the Osirian might be a remnant of that same lost culture. Of course, most Egyptologists reject this idea, arguing that the erosion can be explained by other factors and that there's no evidence of any advanced civilization in Egypt before the dynastic period. But the questions remain. Why build something so massive and bury it underground? Why use that particular style of stonework, and how did they move those enormous blocks without the tools and technology we associate with later Egyptian construction? Now let's go to Malta, because the megalithic temples of Malta are seriously underrated. These structures are older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, and they're some of the earliest freestanding stone buildings in the world. The oldest ones, like Gantija, date back to around 3600 BC, which makes them over 5,000 years old. And they're not simple structures. These are complex multi-room temples with massive stone walls, intricate carvings, and evidence of sophisticated astronomical alignments. The stones used in construction weigh up to 50 tons, and they were quarried, transported, and erected by people who supposedly hadn't even invented the wheel yet. How do you move a 50-ton block of limestone without wheels, without metal tools, without any of the technology we take for granted? The standard explanation is ramps, rollers, lots of manpower. Maybe. But when you actually visit these sites and see the precision of the stonework, it's hard to believe it was done with just ropes and wooden levers. Some of the temples have corbelled roofs, which require careful engineering to prevent collapse. Others have perfectly circular rooms which are difficult to construct even with modern tools. And then there are the carvings. Spirals, animals, abstract patterns that suggest some kind of symbolic or religious meaning. One of the most interesting aspects is the alignment. Many of these temples are oriented towards specific solar events like the solstices and equinoxes, which means the builders had a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. They weren't just stacking rocks, they were creating calendars in stone marking the passage of time and the cycles of the heavens. But who were these people? We don't know much about them. They left no written records, no clear descendants. By around 2500 BC, the temple-building culture on Malta just disappears from the archaeological record. Nobody knows why. Maybe they were wiped out by disease or invasion. Maybe they just moved elsewhere. But they left behind these incredible structures that still stand today. Silent reminders of a forgotten civilization that achieved something remarkable and then vanished. Let's talk about Nan Madol, because this place is genuinely bizarre. It's located off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia, and it's essentially an ancient city built on top of a coral reef. Not next to a reef, on top of it. The whole complex consists of nearly 100 artificial islands constructed from massive basalt columns, some weighing up to 50 tons. These columns are stacked log cabin style to form walls, platforms, and tombs, creating a sprawling network of canals and structures that's been called the Venice of the Pacific. The thing is, nobody really knows how old Nan Madol is. Radiocarbon dating suggests construction began around 1200 AD, but local legends claim the site is much older, built by a lost race using magic or some kind of advanced technology. And when you look at the logistics involved, you start to understand why those legends exist. The basalt columns had to be quarried from a site on the other side of the island, then transported across water to the reef, then somehow lifted and stacked into place. Each column weighs several tons, and there are thousands of them. The total amount of stone used in Nan Madol is estimated at around 750,000 metric tons. Moving that much material without modern equipment seems almost impossible, yet somebody did it. The purpose of Nan Madol is also unclear. Most archaeologists think it was a ceremonial and political center for the Saudeleur dynasty, a ruling elite who controlled Pohnpei for centuries. But the scale of construction seems excessive for a small island population. Some of the structures, like Nandowas, are massive tomb complexes with walls over 20 feet high and outer walls enclosing an area of about 2.5 acres. Why build something so elaborate? What were they trying to achieve? And then there's the mystery of abandonment. By the time European explorers arrived in the 1800s, Nan Madol was already deserted, slowly being reclaimed by the jungle. The local people avoided the site, claiming it was haunted or cursed. To this day, there are stories about strange lights, unexplained sounds, and people getting sick after visiting certain parts of the ruins. Obviously, that's probably just folklore, but it adds to the eerie atmosphere of the place. Alright, so we've covered a few of the big ones, but there are dozens more. Carnac in France with its thousands of standing stones arranged in mysterious rows. The Hypogeum in Malta, an underground temple carved from solid rock. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfectly round granite balls weighing up to 15 tons scattered across the jungle. Everywhere you look, there are these remnants of prehistoric cultures that achieved things we can barely explain. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating and frustrating at the same time. Because we want answers, we want to know who built these things and how and why, but the truth is we're mostly just guessing. Sure, we have theories, we have educated speculation based on archaeology and engineering and historical context. But when it comes down to it, we're looking at structures that are thousands of years old, built by people who left no written records, No instruction manuals, no clear explanation of their methods or motivations. We're trying to reverse engineer civilizations from the fragments they left behind. And sometimes those fragments just don't make sense. Which brings us to the bigger question, the one that hangs over all of these sites. Were these structures built by people like us just using techniques we've forgotten? Or is there something else going on, something we're missing? Some researchers think these megalithic sites are evidence of a lost global civilization, an advanced culture that existed before recorded history and was wiped out by some kind of cataclysm, maybe a flood or an ice age or an asteroid impact. They point to similarities in construction techniques across different continents, the precision stonework, the astronomical alignments, the use of massive blocks. They argue that these similarities suggest contact or shared knowledge, that maybe there was a time when humanity was more connected and more advanced than we realize. Others think that's giving ancient people too little credit, that humans have always been clever and resourceful, and that with enough time and effort you can accomplish anything. Accomplish incredible things even with primitive tools. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, as it usually is. But that doesn't make these structures any less mysterious or impressive. And we're just getting started here, because in the next part we're going to dig even deeper into some of the most controversial and mind-bending prehistoric sites on the planet. Places that challenge not just our understanding of ancient engineering, but our entire conception of human history. So stick around. We're going to start with Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And honestly, this place breaks a lot of rules when it comes to what we thought we knew about early human societies. For decades, the standard story was that humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers until around 10,000 years ago when agriculture developed. And then once people started farming, they settled down, built permanent structures, developed organized religion, all that stuff. Göbekli Tepe flips that narrative completely upside down. This site dates back to around 9,600 BCE, which makes it roughly 11,600 years old. And it's clearly a religious or ceremonial center with massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles, some of them weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals, mostly predators like lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures. And here's the thing that doesn't make sense. The people who built this weren't farmers, they were still hunter-gatherers. There's no evidence of permanent settlements nearby. No signs of agriculture or domesticated animals. So somehow these nomadic groups organized themselves, quarried and transported these enormous stones, carved them with sophisticated imagery, and assembled them into these circular structures, and then for some reason they buried the whole thing. Yeah, buried it. Deliberately. They filled in the site with debris and covered it up, and we have no idea why. Maybe it was to preserve it, maybe it was part of some ritual, maybe they just decided they were done with it, nobody knows. And the implications of Göbekli Tepe are kind of staggering when you think about it, because if hunter-gatherers could build something this complex, this organized, this ambitious, then what else were they capable of? How many other sites like this might be out there, still buried, still undiscovered? The Arkid Göbekli Tepe klausologist who excavate Schmidt believed that the site might have actually been the catalyst for agriculture, not the result of it. His Attic groups came together. Perio theory was that these nomdically to build and maintain this religious center, and that over time the need to feed all those people led them to start cultivating crops. It's a complete reversal of the traditional narrative. Religion came first, not second. And if that's true at Göbekli Tepe, maybe it's true elsewhere too. Maybe we've been thinking about the development of civilization backwards this whole time, moving on to another site that challenges conventional timelines, the Sphinx in Egypt. Now, obviously, the Sphinx itself is famous, everyone knows about it, but what most people don't realize is that there's serious debate about how old it actually is. The mainstream view, the one you'll find in textbooks, says the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, roughly the same time as the pyramids at Giza. But they're shock from archaeologists, most notably Robert Boston University, who've examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and concluded that it has to be much, much older. Shock's argument is based on the type of weathering visible on the Sphinx's body. Clear signs of water, he says it shows erosion, specifically rainfall. The problem the kind caused by prolonged had that kind of sustained rainfall in thousands with that is Egypt hasn't of years. The last time the climate in that region was wet enough to cause that kind of erosion was somewhere around 7,000 to 9,000 BCE, which would make the Sphinx at least 9,000 years old, possibly older. If that's true, it predates ancient Egyptian civilization by thousands of years, which means it was built by someone else, some culture we don't know about. Now, mainstream Egyptologists really don't like this theory. They point out that there's no other evidence of a civilization advanced enough to build something like the Sphinx existing in Egypt that early. No pottery, no tools, no settlements that Ion could be. And they argue that the arrow's explained by other factors like wind and sand and chemical weathering. But Shock stands by his analysis, and he's not the only one. Other geologists have looked at the site and come to similar conclusions. So you've got this weird situation where the physical evidence, at least according to some experts, suggests one thing. But the historical and archaeological context suggests something completely different. And nobody's been able to reconcile those two things yet. It's possible the Sphinx is exactly as old as we think it is, and the erosion patterns are just unusual. Or it's possible there was an advanced culture in Egypt thousands of years before the pharaohs, and we just haven't found the evidence yet. Or maybe the Sphinx was started by one culture and finished by another. We really don't know. Then there's the Osirian at Abydos, also in Egypt, and this place is just bizarre. It's located right next to the Temple of Seti I, which dates to around 1300 BCE, but the Osirian itself looks nothing like the temple. The construction style is completely different. The temple is typical New Kingdom architecture, lots of detailed carvings, hieroglyphics, decorated columns. The Osirion is massive, plain blocks of stone, some of them weighing over 100 tons, fitted together with almost no decoration. It looks more like the Valley Temple at Giza than anything from Seti's time. And here's where it gets interesting. The Osirian is built at a much lower level than the temple. It's actually below the water table, which means it floods regularly. Why would anyone intentionally? Some researchers think the Osirian is built something that way actually much older than the temple. That it was already there when Seti built his temple next to it. And maybe he incorporated it into his complex because it was already considered a sacred site. The architectural style certainly suggests it could be older, possibly much older, but again, there's no definitive proof. No inscriptions, no dating evidence, just this strange, massive fit with the timeline we structure that doesn't quite talk about have. Pumapunku in Bolivia, because this is one that really gets people fired up. Pumapunku is part of a larger complex called Tiwanaku, and it's located high up in the Andes at about 12,000 feet above sea level. The site dates to somewhere around 500 to 600 CE, so it's not as old as some of the others we've talked about. But what makes it remarkable is the precision of the stonework. These aren't rough-cut blocks, they're perfectly flat surfaces, precise right angles, complex interlocking shapes, some of them with grooves and channels carved into them that look almost machined. The blocks are made from andesite and granite, both extremely hard stones, and they're fitted together so tightly you can't slip a piece of paper between them. And remember, this is at 12,000 feet in the mountains. The nearest quarry for some of these stones is miles away. How did they transport blocks weighing 50, 60, 100 tons across that kind of terrain? How did they cut and shape them so precisely? The people who built Pumapunku didn't have metal tools, at least not steel or iron. They didn't have the wheel. So what were they using? There are all kinds of theories, some more plausible than others. Some researchers think they used harder stones as tools, basically pounding and grinding the blocks into shape over long periods of time. Others think they might have had some kind of advanced knowledge we don't understand, maybe acoustic levitation or something like that, which sounds crazy, but people bring it up. The most frustrating thing about Pumapunku is that the site is in ruins. It's been looted, damaged by earthquakes, scattered by floods. The Spanish conquistadors destroyed a lot of it. So we're trying to figure out what it originally looked like and how it was built based on incomplete evidence. Some of the blocks are clearly out of place, moved from wherever they originally were. And there are blocks that look like they were part of something larger, some kind of structure or machine almost, but we can't tell what because the rest of it is missing. It's like trying to assemble a puzzle when of the pieces and know you only have a quarter picture to reference. Now let's jump over to the Mediterranean and talk about the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta. This is an underground complex carved entirely out of solid limestone, and it goes down 3 levels, about 35 feet below the surface. It was discovered by accident in 1902 when workers were building houses and broke through the roof of one of the chambers. Inside, they found this sprawling network of rooms and passages, all carved by hand, with smooth walls and domed ceilings and decorative elements. The complex dates to around 3,600 to 2,500 BCE, which makes it roughly 5,000 years old, and it was used as a burial site. Archaeologists found the remains of about 7,000 people inside, along with pottery, jewelry, and other artifacts. But here's the weird part. One of the chambers in the hypogeum has unusual acoustic properties. It's called the oracle chamber. And if you speak or make sound at a certain frequency around 110 hertz, the whole room resonates. Your voice echoes and amplifies in this strange way that's almost disorienting. Some people who've experienced it say it feels like the sound is vibrating inside your skull. Why would the ancient Maltese carve a room specifically designed to resonate at that frequency? Was it intentional, or just a lucky accident of the chamber's shape and size? Some researchers think it was used for rituals, that the resonance was meant to induce altered states of consciousness or create a sense of awe and spiritual presence. There's actually some scientific research suggesting that exposure to sound at around 110 hertz can affect brain activity, particularly in areas related to emotion and mood. So maybe the people who built the hypogeum understood something about acoustics and human psychology that we're only now rediscovering. Or maybe it's just a coincidence, and they carved the chamber the way they did for other reasons. Either way, it's a remarkable feat of engineering. They carved this entire complex with stone and bone tools, working entirely underground, and somehow they managed to create these smooth, lasted for thousands of years. Symmetrical chambers that have the precision is incredible. Some of the doorways are perfectly rectangular, the walls are smooth and uniform, and into the stone that look almost modern, there are decorative elements carved. Then we have the stone circles of Senegambia in West Africa, and these don't get nearly as much attention as European megalithic sites, Stonehenge or the other, but they're just as impressive. Their stone circles spread across are over 1,000 Senegal and Gambia, arranged in groups, and they date to somewhere between the 3rd century BCE and the 16th century CE, so they were built over a long period of time. The stones themselves are laterite pillars, some of them standing over 8 feet tall and weighing several tons. They're arranged in circles, usually between 8 and 14 stones per circle, and in the center of many of the circles are burial mounds, so clearly they had some kind of funerary or ceremonial purpose. But what's interesting is how little we know about the people who built them. There are no written records, no clear historical accounts. The local oral traditions mention the stones, but they don't explain who built them or why. Some of the circles are aligned with astronomical features, the solstices or equinoxes, but not all of them. Some seem to be oriented toward other circles or landmarks, and the fact that they were built over periods suggests this such a long time wasn't a single culture or civilization, but a tradition that was passed down and maintained for centuries. And that brings up a question that applies to a lot of these sites. How do traditions like that survive? How does knowledge get passed down over hundreds or thousands of years without writing? Oral tradition, obviously, but oral tradition is fragile. It changes over time. Details get lost or distorted. And yet somehow these cultures manage to maintain not just the idea of building stone circles, but the specific techniques and knowledge required to quarry, transport, and erect these massive stones. That suggests a level of cultural continuity and organization that's really impressive. And it makes you wonder what other knowledge they might have had that didn't survive. Things that weren't recorded in stone or pottery. things that existed only in memory and practice and got lost when the culture eventually disappeared. We're probably missing huge chunks of human history written down, or because the records were destroyed, or just because the knowledge was never decayed. And the stone structures are all we have left, these silent monuments that hint at something larger but don't tell us the full story. All right, let's talk about the Carnac stones in Brittany, France, because this is another one of those places that just doesn't make sense when you really think about it. Carnac has over 3,000 standing stones arranged in long rows that stretch for several kilometers. The stones date to somewhere around 4,500 to 3,300 BCE. So they're older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids. And nobody knows why they were arranged this way. Some researchers think they're aligned with astronomical events. Others think they marked territorial boundaries or processional routes. There are burial mounds nearby, so maybe they had some connection to funerary practices. But the truth is, we're just guessing. The stones were erected by Neolithic people who left no written records, and the local legends that survived into historical times don't really explain anything. They just say the stones were placed by giants or gods or wizards, the usual mythological stuff. What's clear is that arranging these stones required a massive amount of labor and organization. Thousands of people working over generations to quarry, transport, and erect these metal tools. Without wheels, without any of the technology stones, and they did it without what we'd consider essential for that kind of project. Why? What were they trying to achieve that was worth that much effort? And this is the pattern you see over and over with these prehistoric sites. Massive effort, sophisticated planning, incredible precision, but no clear explanation for why, which leads some people to speculate that maybe these structures served purposes we don't understand. Maybe they were part of some kind of global system or network. Maybe they had functions that went beyond what we'd consider practical or religious. And look, I'm not saying it's aliens or ancient advanced technology or any of that stuff, but I am saying that we're clearly missing something. These sites don't fit neatly into our understanding of prehistoric cultures, and the more we learn about them, the more questions we have. So maybe instead of trying to force them into the narrative we've constructed willing to recede, we should be inside that narrative entirely. Maybe human history is stranger and more complicated than we've been taught. Maybe in falls, advances there were rises and collapses that happened long before recorded history began. Maybe the story of civilization isn't a straight line from primitive to advanced, but something messier, with peaks and valleys we're only now starting to recognize. And these stone structures scattered across every continent might be the only evidence we have of those lost chapters. Which means we should probably be paying a lot more attention to them, and trying a lot harder to figure out what they're really telling us about who we used to be. Now let's look at the Nazca lines in Peru, because these are probably one of the most famous prehistoric mysteries, and for good reason. The lines were created sometime between 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture, and they consist of hundreds of enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor. Some of them are simple lines that stretch for miles. Others are geometric shapes, And then there are the famous animal figures, a spider, a monkey, a hummingbird, a condor, all massive in scale. The thing about the Nazca lines is that you can't really see them properly unless you're in the air. From ground level, they just look like shallow trenches in the dirt. But from a plane or a high vantage point, the patterns become clear. And they're incredibly precise. The lines were made by removing the reddish surface stones to reveal the lighter ground beneath. And because the Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth with almost no rain or wind, the lines have survived for over 1,000 years without much erosion. So the obvious question is, why would a culture without flight technology create massive images that can only be fully appreciated from the explanation? Is that they were meant to air? The traditional for the gods, that the Nazca people created these figures as offerings or messages to deities in the sky. Some researchers think they were part of religious rituals or processional pathways. Others have suggested they're related to astronomy, that the lines point to celestial events or mark the positions of constellations. There's also a theory that they're connected to water, that the lines to aquifers or were somehow map underground of these explanations, fully ceremonies. But none used in rain account for the scale and complexity of what's there. And then there's the question of how they did it. Creating lines that are perfectly straight over distances of several miles without any way to see the overall design from above that requires some serious planning and mathematical skill. They would have had to work from small-scale models and then scale them up with incredible precision. Some researchers have tried to recreate the process and found that it's possible, but it's difficult and time-consuming and requires a level of organization that suggests this was a major cultural priority for the Nazca people. What was so important about these lines that brings us back to the why entire culture dedicated massive resources to creating them over hundreds of years, and why did they stop? The Nazca civilization eventually collapsed, possibly due to climate change or environmental degradation, and the lines were abandoned. But they're still there, preserved by the desert, waiting for someone to figure out what they really mean. Moving on to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, because this site has basically rewritten what we thought we knew about the development of human civilization. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in the 1990s, and it dates to around 9,600 BCE. Which makes it roughly 11,600 years old. That's about 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7,000 years older than the pyramids. It was built by hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly hadn't developed agriculture yet, hadn't formed permanent settlements, hadn't developed the kind of social organization we thought was necessary for monumental architecture. And yet here's this massive complex of stone pillars arranged in circular formations, some of them weighing up to 10 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. The site consists of multiple circular structures, each one surrounded by T-shaped limestone pillars that are precisely positioned and carefully carved. The pillars are decorated with images of foxes, lions, bulls, scorpions, vultures, and other creatures, along with geometric patterns and symbols that we don't understand. Some of the pillars have human-like features, arms and hands carved into the stone, as if they're meant to represent stylized human figures. The whole thing is incredibly sophisticated, way more advanced than anything else from that time period. And here's the thing that really messes with archaeologists. After Göbekli Tepe was built and used for maybe 1,000 years or so, it was deliberately buried in all the structures. Does somebody fill with dirt and rubble, carefully covering everything up? Why would you do that? Why would you spend generations building this incredible site and then intentionally bury it? Nobody knows. And it gets weirder because Göbekli Tepe isn't unique. Since its discovery, archaeologists have found other similar sites in the region, all dating to roughly the same period, all featuring the same kind of T-shaped pillars and circular arrangements, which suggests this wasn't just one strange, but rather a widespread cultural isolated community doing something practice across a large area. And this has huge implications for how we understand the Neolithic period, because it suggests that complex have actually preceded agriculture, not the religious or ceremonial practices might other way around. The traditional narrative is that human settlements, which led to social complexity, which eventually developed farming, which led to permanent-mental architecture. But Göbekli led to religion, and Montepe flips that sequence. It suggests that maybe religion came first, that the need to build these ceremonial sites might have actually driven the development of agriculture and settled communities. Because you can't maintain a site like Göbekli Tepe with a small nomadic group. You need a long period of time, of people working together over, which means you need a stable food supply, which means you need agriculture. So maybe the desire to build these structures is what pushed humans to figure out farming, not the other way around. Then there's the megalithic temples of Malta, which are some of the oldest freestanding stone structures in the world. The temples date to around 3,600 to 2,500 BCE, and they're incredibly well preserved considering their age. There are over 30 of these temples scattered across the islands of Malta and Gozo, and they all share similar architectural features: massive stone blocks, corbelled roofs, intricate carvings, and add in a clover-leaf pattern. The temples were distinctive layout with multiple chambers arranged clearly designed for some kind of religious or ceremonial purpose. And many of them contain evidence of animal sacrifice and ritual offerings. What's interesting about the Maltese temples is that they show a clear evolution in architectural technique over time. The earliest temples are relatively simple, just basic stone enclosures. Past the designs. But as the centuries became more complex, the stones got bigger, the carvings got more elaborate. By the time you get to sites like Gantija or Hagar Chim, you're looking at truly massive structures with stones weighing up to 50 tons precisely fitted together without mortar. The people who built these temples had clearly developed sophisticated engineering skills and a deep understanding of structural mechanics. But then, around 2,500 BCE, the whole temple building culture just stops. The sites were abandoned, and the knowledge of how to build them seems to have been lost. Nobody knows why. Some researchers think there was an environmental collapse, maybe a drought or soil degradation that made the islands uninhabitable. Others think there might have been an invasion or some kind of social upheaval. But there's no clear evidence for any of these scenarios, just the fact that one of the most advanced prehistoric cultures in the Mediterranean suddenly disappeared. And here's something really strange about the Maltese temples. Many of them are aligned with astronomical events, solstices and equinoxes, just like Stonehenge and other megalithic sites. But the Maltese temples also have something unique. They have acoustic properties. Researchers have found that certain chambers within the temples have resonant frequencies that can amplify sound in specific ways. Some of the spaces are designed to create echo effects or to amplify low-frequency sounds, which suggests that sound might have played an important role in the development of human culture, role in whatever rituals were performed there. There are even theories that the temples might have been used for some kind of acoustic healing or trance induction, using sound to alter consciousness, which, if true, would suggest a much more sophisticated understanding of acoustics and psychology than we usually credit prehistoric people with having. Let's talk about Newgrange in Ireland for a minute, because this is another one of those sites that's just incredibly precise in ways that seem almost impossible for the time period. Newgrange is a passage tomb that dates to around 3200 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. It's a massive circular mound about 85 meters in diameter and 13 meters high, made from layers of stone and earth. But the really incredible thing about Newgrange is what happens inside during the winter solstice. The tomb has a long passage leading to a central chamber, and above's a the entrance there opening called the roof box. On the morning of the winter solstice, and only on that morning, the rising sun shines through the roof box and illuminates the entire length of the passage, lighting up the central chamber for about 17 minutes. This alignment is so precise that it only works for a few days around the solstice, and it's been functioning perfectly for over 5,000 years. Think about what that means in terms of planning and execution. The people who built Newgrange had to have a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and solar movements. They had to know exactly where the sun would rise on the winter solstice, and they had to orient the entire structure to capture that light at precisely the right angle. And they had to do all this computers, no precision with Stone Age technology, no instruments, just observation and mathematical calculation. The chamber itself is also an engineering marvel. It's built using a corbelled roof technique where layers of stone are gradually stepped inward until they meet at the top, CR. Eating a dome that's been completely watertight for thousands of years. The passage and chamber are decorated with elaborate spiral carvings and geometric patterns, some of which might have astronomical or symbolic significance, though we don't really know for sure. And like a lot of these prehistoric sites, Newgrange raises more questions than it answers. Why was it so important to mark the winter solstice? What rituals were performed in that chamber when the light entered? Why go to such incredible lengths to create this effect? We know it was a tomb because human remains were found inside, but it seems like it was much more than just a burial site. It was clearly a place of immense spiritual or ceremonial importance, something that justified the enormous effort required to build it. Now, over in the Americas, there's Cahokia, which is one of the most underappreciated prehistoric sites in North America. Cahokia was a massive urban center located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, and at its peak around 1050 to 1200 CE. It was home to somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the same time. The site is dominated by Monk's Mound, which is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, a massive platform mound that covers 14 acres at its base and rises to about 100 feet in height. The mound was built entirely by hand, basket by basket of earth over a period of several centuries, and it wasn't just a mound, it was a complex structure with multiple levels and terraces, and there's evidence that a large wooden building stood on top of its residence. Cahokia also, probably some kind of temple or elite, has a feature called Woodhenge, which is a series of large wooden posts arranged in circles that functioned as a solar calendar, marking the solstices and equinoxes. There were actually multiple woodhenges at Cahokia, rebuilt and expanded over time, which shows that astronomical observation was an important part of their culture. The site also has numerous smaller mounds, plazas, and residential areas, all laid out in a planned grid that suggests a high level of social organization and central planning. But here's what's strange about Cahokia: it was abandoned. By around 1350 CE, the city was empty. Nobody knows exactly why. There are theories about climate change, resource depletion, social unrest, disease, but no definite answers. What's clear is that Cahokia represents a level of cultural complexity and urban development that a lot of people don't understand about America. This wasn't an associate with prehistoric North primitive society. This was an advanced civilization with sophisticated architecture, astronomy, social hierarchy, and long-distance trade networks. And then it just ended. These sites, all of them, Nazca, Göbekli Tepe, Malta, Newgrange, Kaav, others we have Anokia, and dozens even touched on, they all point to the same conclusion. Our understanding of prehistoric human capabilities is incomplete. These weren't primitive people stumbling around in the dark. They were skilled engineers, astronomers, artists, and organizers who accomplished things that we still struggle to explain. And maybe that should make us reconsider the whole narrative about human progress, the idea that we're constantly advancing, constantly improving, constantly getting smarter. Maybe it's not that simple. Maybe there were civilizations in the past that achieved things we've forgotten how to do. Maybe knowledge was lost, maybe catastrophes set humanity back, maybe the story of civilization is less about continuous progress and more about cycles of rise and fall that we're only now starting to recognize. And that's the thing that maybe bothers me most about all of this. We're taught this narrative, right? That human history is this straight line going upward. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Revolution, Information Age, each step a clear improvement on the last. But when you actually look at the evidence, that story falls apart pretty quickly. 'Cause Göbekli Tepe. How do you explain people 11,000 years ago building something that's sophisticated when they supposedly hadn't even invented agriculture yet? And how do you explain the precision at Newgrange, or the astronomical engineering at Sacsayhuaman, or the sheer organizational capacity required to build Cahokia? These aren't anomalies, they're everywhere. And they suggest something that makes a lot of academics uncomfortable, which is that maybe ancient people weren't less capable than us. Maybe they knew things we don't. Maybe they had technologies or techniques that got lost. And maybe instead of this constant upward progress, human civilization has gone through cycles, peaks and valleys. Times when knowledge accumulated and times when it all got wiped out and people had to start over. There's this site in Turkey called Derinkuyu, and it's not prehistoric. It's probably from around the 8th century BCE. But it's still worth mentioning because it completely changes how you think about what ancient people could build. Derinkuyu is an underground city. Not like a basement or a tunnel system, an actual city carved entirely into soft volcanic rock going down at least 18 stories deep, maybe more. It could hold somewhere between 20,000 and 60,000 people, depending on who you ask. There are living quarters, storage rooms, wells, animals, wine presses, chap kitchens, stables, forels, schools, communal spaces, ventilation shafts that go all the way to the surface, and massive stone doors that could be rolled shut from the inside to seal off entire sections. The whole thing was designed so that if you were inside and under attack, you could close those doors and basically become unreachable. And the ventilation system, this is important. It's so well designed that fresh air could circulate through the entire complex, even when all the doors were sealed. That's not accidental, that's engineering. And here's the thing, Derinkuyu isn't unique. There are dozens of these underground cities in the Cappadocia region of Turkey, all connected by tunnels, some of them stretching for miles. Nobody knows exactly who built them or why, but the scale of it is insane. You millions of tons of rock are talking about moving out spaces large enough to house entire populations, doing it all by hand with primitive tools and doing it in a way that's structurally sound enough to last thousands of years. And this was happening in a time period when most people assume ancient civilizations were pretty basic, but they weren't. They were doing things that required long-term planning, massive labor coordination, advanced knowledge of geology and engineering, and a level of social organization that we usually don't associate with the ancient world. So where does all of this leave us? Because at this point we've looked at dozens of these sites, structures that don't fit the timeline, engineering that shouldn't be possible with the tools they supposedly had, astronomical alignments that require knowledge we didn't think they possessed. And the standard explanations, the ones you get from mainstream archaeology, they work for some of it. Maybe, but not all of it. There are too many gaps, too many things that don't quite add up. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to have all the answers right now. Maybe the whole point of these structures is that they force us to ask better questions. Because here's what we know for sure. Humans have been around for a long time. Way longer than recorded history. And for most of that time, we have almost no idea what they were doing, what they knew, what they built. We've got these fragments, these stone monuments scattered across the planet, and we're trying to reverse engineer entire civilizations from them. It's like finding a single page from a 1,000-page book and trying to figure out the whole story. You can make guesses, you can construct theories, but you're always going to be missing most of the picture. And maybe that's what these prehistoric structures really are. Not answers, but reminders. Reminders that human history is deeper and stranger than we've been taught. That the people who came before us weren't primitive, weren't stupid, weren't incapable. They were us. Same brains, same creativity, same drive to build something that would outlast them. And they succeeded because here we are, thousands of years later, still trying to figure out what they did and how they did it. Still standing in front of these massive stones and feeling that same sense of awe and confusion that probably everyone who's ever seen them has felt. So maybe the mystery is the point. Maybe these structures were meant to last precisely because the people who built them knew that someday, long after they were gone, someone would find them and wonder. And maybe that wondering, that curiosity, that refusal to accept easy answers, maybe that's what connects us to them across all those thousands of years. Because they asked questions too, about the stars, about the earth, about what it means to be human. And they built their answers in stone, knowing that stone lasts longer than memory, longer than language, longer than everything except the questions themselves.